I wasn't looking for anything. Not anymore. After a string of half-hearted dates and conversations that fizzled out before they even began, I was done trying. Emotionally tired, that's how I'd describe myself if anyone asked. Not heartbroken, not bitter, just tired. And maybe a little lonely in a way I didn't want to admit. So when Devin, a coworker I barely knew outside of shared elevator rides and the occasional lunchroom chat, mentioned a cabin in passing, I hadn't expected it to stick in my mind. "You look like you could use some quiet," he had said one Thursday afternoon. He was scrolling through his phone, barely even looking up. I must have sighed too loud or worn my exhaustion too plainly on my face. "There's a family place upstate. It's usually empty this time of year. My dad's cabin, old, cozy, decent Wi-Fi if you care. If you want to get away for the weekend, I can shoot you the key code." I blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," he said with a smirk. "You'll sleep like a baby. No city noise. No people. Just trees and birds and your own thoughts, if that's your thing." He scribbled the address and code on a napkin. "I was planning to go myself, but I've got a client meeting Saturday now. It'll be empty." I hesitated for a beat, then folded the napkin and tucked it in my pocket. Maybe a weekend away wouldn't be the worst thing. The drive up was quiet, just winding roads, fading golden trees, and a sky so wide it made me feel smaller than I had in months. I rolled the windows down for a while and let the wind hit my face. The crisp scent of pine and damp earth filled the car. It was good, calming. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, the sun had started dipping behind the hills. The cabin sat nestled between tall pines, its weathered wood exterior catching the last light like it belonged there, like it had always been waiting. I grabbed my bag and walked up the porch steps, expecting silence. Instead, the door opened. A man stood there, older than me by a good 2 decades, maybe more. Late 40s, early 50s. Broad shoulders. Flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves. Salt and pepper beard trimmed close. There was something rugged about him, like he'd built the porch with his own hands and fixed everything that ever broke. We both paused for a moment, unsure. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice deep but polite. I'm a friend of Devin's," I said quickly. "He said I could stay here this weekend?" Cabin was supposed to be empty. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Right? You must be the coworker he mentioned. He didn't tell me you were still coming." "I can go," I offered, already stepping back. "It's totally fine." No, he said, waving a hand. "Come in." Devin got called out to LA for some last-minute work thing. He just left this morning. I figured the trip was off. I hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," he nodded. "I'm only here to winterize the pipes and check the roof. Won't be in your way." Still unsure, I stepped inside. The cabin was warm, not just from the old wood stove burning in the corner, but from the way the light filled the space. Cozy couches draped with worn blankets, a small bookshelf with dog-eared novels, windows looking out onto a still lake that reflected the last blush of sunset. I exhaled for what felt like the first time all week. He watched me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You look like you needed this." "Yeah," I admitted. "I really did." "I'm Mark, by the way," he said, extending a hand. "Devin's dad." I shook it. His grip was firm, warm. "Nice to meet you. There's a guest room down the hall. Bathrooms on the left. Kitchen stocked. Feel free to help yourself. I'll be around, but mostly out back or upstairs fixing things." "Thanks," I said. "This is really kind." He just nodded, then turned back toward the kitchen. I wandered the place for a while after dropping my bag. Every creak of the floorboards, every quiet hum of the wind through the windows, it all wrapped around me like a blanket. The lake shimmered outside, untouched. The silence wasn't heavy. It was welcoming. Still, as I sat on the couch later that night with a book I hadn't touched in months, I couldn't shake the strange feeling. Something about Mark, the way he'd looked at me, not unkind, just curious, like he was trying to figure something out. But maybe that was just me, tired, alone, seeing things that weren't there. Still, when I finally went to bed and lay in that unfamiliar room, I kept thinking about the way his voice had sounded when he said I looked like I needed this. And the strange thing was, he was right. I thought about leaving. As I unpacked my bag in the guest room, the thought whispered behind every movement. I could get back in my car, find a cheap motel in town, and let Mark have the place to himself. It had been offered to me under different circumstances, after all. Devin hadn't said anything about his dad being there. But the truth was, I was too tired. Too tired to repack. Too tired to drive. Too tired to explain why I was walking away from something as harmless as a quiet cabin and a polite man fixing pipes. So I stayed. And I was glad I did. Later that evening, I wandered into the kitchen, unsure of what the unspoken rules were. Mark was already there, sleeves rolled up, cooking something in a cast-iron skillet. I was going to make a sandwich, I offered awkwardly. You still can, he said without turning around. But you might regret it. This is elk sausage and sweet potatoes. My dad's old recipe. Elk? I blinked. He chuckled. Don't worry. It tastes better than it sounds. I sat at the small table in the corner, the smell of garlic and butter slowly filling the room. You ever hunt it yourself? I asked. He looked over his shoulder. I have. But this batch came from my buddy who still hunts up north. I'm too slow these days. I smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. Mark set 2 plates on the table and poured water into a couple of mismatched glasses. Hope you don't mind sharing, he said as he sat down across from me. I didn't. In fact, it was strangely comforting. The way he set the table with casual confidence. The way he talked, not to fill silence, but to invite it in and let it settle between us like a guest. For a few minutes, we ate quietly. The food was better than I expected, rich and tender, the kind of meal that tastes like care. Then Mark looked up and said, So, you're the quiet one who reads during lunch? I blinked. What? He grinned, leaning back in his chair. Devin mentioned you once or twice. Said you were nice, kind of private. Always had a book in your hand. I figured that was you when I saw the copy of East of Eden in your bag. I flushed. Yeah, that's me, I guess. No shame in that, he said, voice low and easy. I used to read a lot myself. Haven't in years, though. Life gets in the way. There was a pause, and then he added, You don't talk much, but I get the sense you think a lot. That's not a bad thing, is it? Not at all, he said. Most people talk too much and think too little. That made me laugh softly, but genuinely. The conversation stretched from books to music to little things about life. Mark had a way of asking questions that weren't intrusive, just curious, interested. His gaze was steady but warm, like he wasn't trying to figure me out, just get to know me in whatever small pieces I was willing to give. And I realized something I hadn't in a long time. I didn't feel the need to perform. He wasn't looking for witty quips or flirtatious energy. He just let me be. That made me notice more about him, too. The careful way he listened. The deep lines around his eyes that suggested more smiles than scowls. The way he'd lean in slightly when I spoke, like every word mattered. Very different from the men I dated or tried to. By the time the plates were cleared and the last of the firewood was stacked near the stove, the air between us had shifted. Still polite, still respectful. But there was something new. Not tension exactly. Curiosity. Warmth. He stretched, yawned, and said, I'll be out on the porch for a bit. Stars are clear tonight if you're into that. I nodded. I think I'll take a bath first. Long drive. Bathroom's all yours, he said. Clawfoot tub is old, but still works. Just don't lean back too hard. The thing's got personality. I smiled and headed to the guest bathroom. It was tucked between the guest room and the back hallway, with worn tiles and a wide window that looked out into the woods. The tub was deep and inviting, clawed feet anchoring it like a relic from a quieter time. I turned the knobs and watched steam curl into the air. As the water rose, I stripped out of my clothes and lowered myself into the warmth. Muscles loosened. My eyes closed. For the first time in what felt like weeks, I felt still. Outside, I could hear faint footsteps on the porch. Mark, probably pacing or just watching the sky. I imagined him leaning against the railing, arms crossed, eyes scanning constellations he probably knew by name. I rested my head against the tub's edge, breath slow. Then a sound. Just a soft creak. I opened my eyes, startled, glancing toward the doorway. The door had been left slightly ajar. For a fleeting second, barely more than a moment, I saw a figure standing in the hallway, just outside the threshold. Still, it was him, Mark. His eyes met mine, startled wide, and then he turned away, disappearing down the hall as silently as he'd come. My heart pounded. Had I imagined it? Was he checking to make sure the water hadn't overflowed? Was it something else? I stayed in the tub longer than I meant to, letting the warmth soothe the sudden pulse in my chest. When I finally got out and wrapped myself in a towel, the cabin was quiet again. I passed the porch window on the way to my room. Mark stood out there, arms crossed just like I'd imagined, head tilted toward the sky. He hadn't said anything, hadn't knocked, hadn't even looked again. And yet, something between us had changed. Something quiet, something waiting. I kept thinking I'd imagined it. The hallway was dark. My eyes were blurry from the steam, and maybe my mind was playing tricks after a long drive and a warm bath. But deep down, I knew what I saw. Just for a second, no longer than a breath, Mark had stood in the hallway, eyes on me through the cracked bathroom door. He hadn't spoken, hadn't stepped forward, just watched, then gone. I dried off slowly, unsure how to feel. Part of me was embarrassed, caught vulnerable, skin bare, not expecting anyone's gaze. But the other part, the part one didn't want to admit out loud, didn't feel violated, felt seen, and somehow wanted. It had been a long time since I'd felt that. I slipped into a clean t-shirt and sweats, running a hand through my damp hair before heading out. The cabin was quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the low hum of crickets outside. Mark was in the kitchen finishing dishes. He glanced over, nodding once. "Feel better?" he asked. "Yeah, thanks," I said, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. He didn't mention what had happened. No awkward apologies. No explanation. And maybe that should have made it worse, the silence, but somehow it didn't. Instead, it added weight to the air between us. Like both of us were balancing something fragile we didn't know how to name. Dinner was simple, reheated stew and warm bread. We didn't talk much. Mark kept his eyes on his plate or the window, chewing slowly, lost in thought. I tried to focus on the food, but my mind kept replaying the look on his face. Not leering, not crude, just stunned. Like he hadn't meant to see me but couldn't look away once he had. And I hadn't looked away either. When we finished, he poured 2 glasses of wine and motioned toward the fireplace. "Sit with me?" he asked. I nodded. The cabin's main room was dim now, the only light coming from the flickering fire. I curled into one side of the couch, pulling a blanket over my lap. Mark sat on the other end, one arm draped over the backrest, holding his glass in his other hand. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the windows like a lullaby. We sat in silence for a while, sipping slowly. I could feel his eyes on me again. Not lingering, but watching when he thought I wouldn't notice. And then finally he said it, quiet, barely above a whisper. "You're beautiful." My eyes flicked to him, startled. He didn't look away. "I wasn't expecting someone like you." I didn't know what to say. My mouth opened, then closed. My heart beat so loudly I was sure he could hear it. His gaze dropped to the fire, as if he hadn't meant to say it out loud. I looked down into my glass, fingers tightening slightly around the stem. A flush crept up my neck. I wasn't used to that word, especially not said like that, not with reverence, not with sincerity. Most men I'd been with used hot or cute or worse, as if I were a thing to unwrap. But this felt different. Still, I said nothing. Couldn't. Not yet. After a few more minutes, he stood up quietly. "I'm heading to bed," he said, his voice calm. "Early morning. I've got to check the roof before it gets cold." I nodded, still unable to meet his eyes. "Sleep well," he added, then disappeared down the hallway. I stayed by the fire long after the flames died down. In the guest room, I lay in bed staring at the wooden ceiling, unable to shut off my thoughts. Had he meant to look? Had he been passing by and accidentally caught a glimpse? Or had he paused, lingered? And what did it mean that I didn't feel violated by it? I wasn't naive. I knew the boundaries between comfort and danger. But with Mark, it hadn't felt dangerous. It had felt deliberate but not cruel. Honest but restrained. And when he said I was beautiful, I believed him. That scared me more than anything. I rolled onto my side, pulling the blanket higher. The bed was soft, the night was still, but my mind was anything but quiet. What was happening here? Why did I want to stay? And why, when I closed my eyes, did I picture the man down the hallway more vividly than anyone I'd dated in years? The morning came quietly. Soft light filtered through the pine trees outside, casting golden streaks across the wooden floor of the cabin. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. It was peaceful, too peaceful for the storm inside my chest. I sat up slowly, still tangled in thoughts from the night before. The words he'd said, "You're beautiful. I wasn't expecting someone like you," echoed like a chord I didn't know how to resolve. When I stepped into the kitchen, Mark was already there. He looked up from the stove, eyes warm, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Morning," he said, like nothing had changed. But everything had. "Morning," I replied, rubbing the back of my neck. He flipped something in the skillet, eggs, maybe. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the room, grounding me. He wore a faded t-shirt this time, and his hair was slightly mussed like he'd just rolled out of bed. "I hope you're hungry," he said. "I made enough for two." I moved toward the counter, hesitating. "I could have helped." "You can help now," he said, tossing me a loaf of bread and pointing to the toaster. "You strike me as someone who knows how to make toast without burning it." "I've had a lot of practice," I said with a half smile. We moved around each other in the small kitchen easily. There was still tension. An unspoken thread pulled tight between us, but it had softened, warmed. It wasn't nerves anymore. It was awareness, careful and deliberate. When we sat down to eat, he passed me the butter, then cleared his throat lightly. "So," he began, "you get away like this often?" I shook my head. "Not really. This is rare. The quiet, the space." He nodded. "Yeah, same. I used to come here with Devin when he was younger. After the divorce, it became my retreat. Got to be myself out here." "Yourself?" I asked cautiously. He paused, chewing slowly. Then he met my eyes. "I've been alone a long time," he said. "Since the divorce, sure, but even before that. I wasn't honest. Not with my ex. Not with my son. Not with myself. I stayed quiet, giving him space. I did what I thought I was supposed to do," he continued. "Got married, had a kid, worked hard. I don't regret having Devin. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. But the rest? It was like wearing someone else's skin." My fork slowed against my plate. "You mean your orientation?" He nodded. "I think I always knew, but I buried it. Out of fear. Out of habit. I tried to be someone I wasn't for so long. I forgot how to be anything else." I swallowed. "Have you ever been with a man?" His gaze didn't waver. "Not openly. Not this real." Those last two words, "this real," landed somewhere deep in my chest. He looked down at his hands, as if they held answers he hadn't spoken yet. "Last night, I didn't mean to intrude. I saw you. Not just your body, though, God. Your—" He trailed off, shaking his head with a breathy laugh. "But I saw something else. Stillness. Kindness. A softness I didn't know I missed." I felt my pulse pick up. "You didn't say anything. I didn't want to scare you off," he said, voice low. "But I didn't want to lie either. Not anymore." Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. He reached across the table then, slow, cautious, and touched my hand. Just the light brush of his fingers over mine. I didn't pull away. His thumb traced a line across the back of my knuckles. I wanted to know what it felt like, to be close to someone who saw me too. I looked at him, really looked, at the quiet ache behind his eyes, the years he'd carried alone. the loneliness hiding in the way he smiled. And in that moment, I realized we weren't that different. I'd been pretending too. Pretending I didn't need anyone. Pretending I was fine settling for silence over connection. And somehow, in this off-season cabin, in the middle of nowhere, I'd found someone else doing the same. I moved around the table slowly, sitting beside him. Our knees touched. He looked at me unsure. So I kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, cautious at first, like we were both waiting for the other to pull away. But neither of us did. His hand came to the side of my face, rough thumb brushing my cheek. He kissed me back, deeply, with a tenderness that felt out of place in a world that often rushed past moments like this. When we pulled away, he didn't speak. Neither did I. We just sat there, hands tangled on the table, breath mingling in the warm cabin air, and let the stillness speak for us. Because in that moment, everything was this real. After the kiss, we didn't speak. We didn't need to. Something had opened between us. Slow and quiet, like a door we both thought had been locked long ago. And now that it was open, neither of us wanted to close it. Mark stood first. He offered me his hand, not like a command, not like a move, but like a question. A quiet, reverent invitation. I took it. He led me through the hallway, the wooden floor creaking gently beneath our steps. We didn't rush. His grip was warm, steady. I felt the years in it, the strength, the patience. But I also felt the hesitancy, like he was still half expecting me to let go. I didn't. When we reached his bedroom, he paused at the doorway and looked at me. There was a moment, just a breath, where I could see the nerves behind his calm. He was strong, yes, but not invincible, and certainly not unaffected. "I don't want to scare you," he said softly. "I don't want this to feel like a mistake in the morning." "It won't," I whispered. "Not if it's real." That seemed to be the thing he needed to hear. Inside, the room was dim, the moonlight casting soft silver lines across the bedspread. He closed the door gently behind us. We didn't leap into anything. There were no frantic hands or gasping urgency. Instead, we stood facing each other at the edge of the bed, breathing in the same rhythm. Then slowly he reached for me. His fingers brushed my cheek, rough from years of work and weather. His thumb traced the edge of my jaw like he was memorizing it. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes. When he kissed me again, it was different. It was fuller, deeper, like he'd let something go, and in its place was something tender and trembling. Our hands moved slowly, along arms, over backs, across ribs. Every movement was a question asked with touch and answered with soft exhales. There was no pressure, no assumptions, just exploration. When we undressed, it wasn't hurried. It felt like shedding stories we no longer needed to carry. I watched as Mark unbuttoned his shirt, his hands a little shaky, his chest rising and falling as he bared himself to me. Not just his body, but his history, his ache. I stepped forward and placed my palm flat against his chest. "I've never done this like this," he admitted. "Me neither," I said. And it was true. There had been others. Dates, hookups, fleeting touches in dimly lit apartments where no one stayed the night. But this was something different. This was someone choosing me. Not for distraction, not for pleasure, but for connection. We moved to the bed, the sheets cool against our skin. He kissed every part of me like it mattered, like it meant something. And in return, I held him like I understood. Not just his body, but the silence he'd lived in, the years he'd buried his truth, the loneliness he thought was permanent. There were whispered things in the dark, little confessions exchanged in the hush between heartbeats. "I used to dream of this," he murmured against my neck. "But I never thought it could be real. Never like this." I ran my fingers through his hair. "You're not alone anymore." At one point, he paused and just looked at me, eyes glassy with something tender and unspoken. "You're so gentle," he said. "I didn't know someone could be this gentle with me." My throat tightened. I didn't either. When we finally collapsed into each other, limbs tangled, breath spent and warm, the silence between us was different now. Not the awkward silence of two strangers who don't know what comes next. This was the silence of belonging, of understanding, of peace. We lay in bed, the covers pulled loosely over us, our bodies still humming from everything we had shared. My head rested on his chest, and I could hear his heart. Steady, strong, familiar. He spoke first. "I know this is complicated," he said quietly. "The age difference, my son, the world, all of it." I nodded, fingers tracing lazy shapes across his skin. "It is." He took a breath. "But I want to know what this could be. I don't want to bury it like I've buried everything else." I looked up at him, my eyes adjusting to the dark. "So do I whispered. He exhaled, long and soft, like he'd been holding that breath for years. His arm wrapped around me tighter. And just like that, we fell asleep. There was no shame, no regret, just warmth, and honesty, and something new, something fragile and bright, blooming quietly in the dark. The morning air was crisp, a little cooler than the day before. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wood smoke across the porch. Mark and I sat side by side in the shade, each with a book in hand, feet resting on the railing, mugs of coffee warming our palms. It was a quiet morning, the kind that settles into your bones and makes you forget about everything else. The kind of morning that didn't need words, because presence alone was enough. His arm rested behind me, not possessively, just close, like we'd found a rhythm in the silence. After everything we'd shared last night, I thought I'd be nervous. But I wasn't. I felt grounded. I felt wanted. Then we heard tires on gravel. Mark lowered his book slightly. "That'll be Devin." My heart stumbled. I hadn't thought about him, about what it would mean, this fragile, unexpected thing between his father and me. I set my mug down, suddenly aware of the space between us, the way we must look. Mark gave my knee a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay. We don't owe anyone shame." But still, I stood as Devin stepped out of his car, his jacket slung over one shoulder, backpack in hand. He froze when he saw us on the porch. "Hey," he said, looking between the two of us, expression unreadable. "Didn't know you were still here." "Hey," I said, forcing a casual smile. "Yeah, plans changed." He looked at his dad, then back at me. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or realization. He didn't say anything at first. Mark stood, too, setting his mug down. "Everything all right with the trip?" "Yeah," Devin said slowly, still studying us. "They moved the pitch to next week. I figured I'd come up early since I had the weekend." "Good," Mark said with a nod. "We've got leftovers in the fridge. Cabin's yours if you need time alone." Devin blinked again. "You're both here?" "Yeah," Mark said evenly. "We've been talking, getting to know each other." His tone was calm, not defensive, not secretive, just honest. Devin's eyes narrowed just slightly, lips pressed together. "Right?" I could feel my stomach tighten, but I stayed quiet. After a beat, Devin looked at me. "Can we talk?" Mark looked to me, giving me space to choose. "Sure," I said. We stepped off the porch and walked toward the woodshed, away from the cabin. Devin shoved his hands into his pockets. "So, something happened." I didn't rush to answer. Then finally I nodded. "Yeah." He let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. "With my dad." "Yeah." He looked at the trees, like he needed something to ground him. "You know, I didn't expect that." "I didn't either," I said gently. He glanced sideways at me. "So, is it serious? Or just a cabin thing?" I met his eyes. "It's real." He didn't answer for a while. I let him process. Finally, he said, "Guess you found what you needed up here, huh?" I smiled, but it was small. "Yeah, I think I did." Devin rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, it's weird, sure. I'm still wrapping my head around it. But if you're both happy, then I'm not going to stand in the way." "That means a lot," I said quietly. He shrugged. "You were always a good guy. Quiet. Honest. Maybe you're what he needed too." There was a pause, long and full. I don't know what happens next, I admitted. Doesn't sound like either of you do, he replied. But maybe that's the point. We walked back to the cabin in silence. As he went inside to unpack, I lingered on the porch. Mark was still sitting in the same spot, eyes scanning my face. Well? He asked. He knows, I said. He's surprised. But okay. Mark nodded, exhaling slowly. I figured it might cost something. Maybe, I said. Maybe not. I sat back beside him, letting our shoulders touch. I don't regret it, I added, looking out at the lake. He reached for my hand. Neither do I. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The final morning at the cabin came slower than the others. Mist curled over the lake like a breath held too long. The pines stood quiet, unmoved by the wind, and the sun filtered through the trees with a kind of gentleness I hadn't noticed before. It was as if the forest knew this was the last day, and was giving us space to feel it fully. Mark and I sat on the porch again, wrapped in worn blankets and sipping coffee. Devin had already packed up and left at dawn, saying something vague about needing time to process and think. He hadn't said much else, but he'd offered me a short nod before pulling away. Not cold, not warm, just honest. I respected that. The quiet between Mark and me wasn't heavy. If anything, it felt sacred. We watched the stillness without trying to fill it, knowing we were nearing a point that would demand words, decisions. And neither of us wanted to break the calm too soon. But eventually, Mark set his mug down and turned toward me. I know we have to talk, he said softly. I nodded, heart already beating faster. I don't want this to be some off-the-grid story we both carry like a secret, he said. I don't want you to leave here and feel like it was all in your head. It wasn't, I said immediately. It never felt that way. He reached over, took my hand. I'm not 20 anymore. I've lived a lot of life and I've spent most of it pretending, hiding, and I don't want to do that anymore. Not with you. I squeezed his fingers. You don't have to. He looked out at the water. I don't know what this looks like in the real world. You've got your job, your life. I've got mine. And Devin, well, he's adjusting. But I don't want to let this go just because it's easier to. It won't be easy, I admitted. But it doesn't have to be impossible. He smiled a little. You always talk like that. Calm. Measured. Like you're feeling everything. But you only let out the right amount. I laughed softly. I've been that way my whole life. Probably why most people overlook me. Not me, he said, looking back at me. I saw you the second I opened that door. That silenced me. He continued, voice gentler now. We don't have to name it. Not today. But I want more than just a memory. Me too, I whispered. I want to see where this goes. Really see. He nodded. Then let's take it slow. Figure it out. One weekend at a time, if that's what it takes. I leaned my head on his shoulder. That sounds like the right kind of pace. We sat like that until the coffee went cold and the sun climbed higher, the air warming around us. Eventually, we packed. I folded my clothes neatly into my bag, and Mark helped me zip it closed like it was the most normal thing in the world. Two men moving through the same space, not rushing, not hiding. When I stood by the car, keys in hand, he walked me to the driver's side and rested a hand on the door. This place is going to feel real empty after you leave, he said. You say that like you haven't been alone before. I have, he replied. But now I know what it feels like not to be. I smiled, heart aching in that soft, stretching kind of way. I'll call you when I get back, I said. And if you ever want to come to the city, I'd like that, he said before I could finish. Eventually, I hesitated, then leaned forward and kissed him. Not rushed, not dramatic, just real. A goodbye that wasn't really a goodbye. When I pulled away, he touched my face once more. Drive safe. Back in the city, everything looked the same. Crowded streets, flashing walk signs, coffee shops humming with conversations I no longer had any interest in. But something in me had shifted. I moved through the days with more clarity, more steadiness. I still sat alone on my lunch breaks, still read quietly in the corners of cafes. But now, I did it knowing someone else had seen me in those moments. Not judged, not tried to fix me, just seen. And it made all the difference. A few nights later, I sat in bed with the window cracked open, letting in the cool night air. My phone buzzed. It was him. Mark. Same time next weekend? I smiled. Me only if you're there to open the door. I set the phone down and turned off the lamp, pulling the blanket up to my chin. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend alone. But in the silence of a mountain cabin, someone saw me, fully. And when I looked into his eyes, I saw loyalty, tenderness, and the kind of love I'd stopped believing in. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have stayed at the cabin? Or left the moment the dad opened the door? Let me know in the comments. I'm really curious what you think about how this story unfolded.